few months ago, one of my granddaughters came over for tea. She'd only been married for a little over a year. As we sat together in my little kitchen, she wrapped both hands around her mug, looked at me with worried eyes, and quietly asked, "Grandma, what's the secret to staying happily married?" Now, that's quite a question to ask a 97-year-old woman. I smiled at her and said, "Oh, sweetheart, if I knew one secret, someone would have written a book about it by now." That made her laugh. But then she reached across the table, took my hand and said, "No, really, you and Grandpa were together for almost 70 years. I want what you had." Her words stayed with me long after she went home, because she wasn't asking how to avoid arguments or how to split household chores. She was asking something much deeper. How do two ordinary people stay side by side through nearly 7 decades of ordinary life? My name is Margaret. I'm 97 years old. I was blessed to spend 69 beautiful years married to the kindest man I've ever known. Now, before you imagine we lived some perfect little story, let me stop you right there. We disagreed. We made mistakes. There were seasons when money was tight. Seasons when we barely had enough sleep because of babies crying through the night. Seasons of illness. Seasons of worry. And yes, there were even days when one of us needed a little extra patience, mostly because of me. People often look at couples who've been together for 50 or 60 years and assume they simply found the right person. But after nearly a century of living, I've learned something different. A lasting marriage isn't something you find, it's something you build. One conversation, one apology, one act of kindness at a time. Not long before my husband passed, we were sitting on our front porch watching the sunset. We didn't need to. After 69 years, silence had become another language we both understood. After a while, he looked over at me and smiled. "You know, Margaret, we've had a good life." I smiled back. "We certainly have." Then he quietly said something I've carried in my heart ever since. The little things were never little. At first, I wasn't quite sure what he meant. But over the years, I've come to understand exactly what he was trying to tell me. Because when I look back on our marriage, I don't remember expensive vacations, or fancy gifts, or perfect anniversaries. I remember him warming my cold hands on winter mornings. I remember dancing together in the kitchen while supper was still cooking. I remember laughing over burned biscuits, holding hands during church, sitting quietly on the porch after long days. Those little moments became the big ones. Today, I'd like to share a few things I wish every married couple knew. Not because I think I have all the answers, but because life has been a very patient teacher. And if these lessons helped two ordinary people stay happily married for nearly 70 years, perhaps they'll bring a little more love, a little more patience, and a little more peace into your home too. So, pour yourself a cup of tea, pull up a chair, and let this old housewife tell you what nearly 7 decades of marriage taught her about love. The first thing I wish every married couple knew is that love is built in ordinary moments, not extraordinary ones. When I was a young bride, I thought romance looked like the movies. Big surprises, fancy dinners, bouquets of flowers. And don't get me wrong, those things are lovely. But after 69 years of marriage, I can tell you something with complete confidence. The strongest marriages are rarely built on grand gestures. They're built on Tuesday mornings. My husband wasn't the kind of man who came home every Friday carrying roses. That simply wasn't who he was. He grew up during hard times. Every dollar mattered. Every penny had a purpose. But do you know what he did do? Every winter, before I woke up, he'd quietly start my old car and let it warm up, so I wouldn't have to climb into an icy seat when I drove to the grocery store. He never announced it, never expected praise. He simply did it because he knew it would make my morning a little easier. At the time, I didn't think much of it. It was just something he did. Now, when I look back, I realize those few quiet minutes each winter morning were saying, "I love you," without using a single word. I tried to love him in ordinary ways too. Every evening, I'd leave a slice of homemade pie covered on the counter if I knew he'd be working late. Not because he asked, because I knew he'd smile the moment he saw it. Some nights it was apple, sometimes peach, sometimes just warm bread with a little butter. It wasn't about the pie, It was about saying, "I was thinking about you today." Love has a beautiful habit of hiding inside small things. A hand resting on someone's shoulder, remembering how they like their coffee, waiting to eat dinner together, covering them with a blanket after they've fallen asleep in their favorite chair. Those moments seem tiny while they're happening, but one day, they're the memories you'll treasure the most. After my husband passed away, people asked me what I missed the most. They expected me to mention birthdays, anniversaries, Christmas. Instead, I missed hearing his boots by the back door. I missed the sound of him humming while he fixed something in the garage. I missed reaching across the couch during the evening news and finding his hand already waiting for mine. Those were the things my heart reached for, not the expensive moments, the ordinary ones. If you're married today, please don't wait for special occasions to show your love. Don't assume your husband already knows how much you appreciate him. Don't assume your wife knows she's beautiful. Tell her. Tell him. Leave little notes. Share a cup of coffee together. Take a walk after supper. Turn off the television once in a while and simply talk. Because one day, you'll discover what my husband meant all those years ago. The little things were never little. And that brings me to the second thing I wish every married couple understood. You don't have to win every argument to have a marriage that wins. The second thing I wish every married couple knew is that you don't have to win every argument. You simply have to protect the relationship. Oh my, if my husband were sitting here beside me, he'd probably laugh at this one, because there were times when both of us were absolutely convinced we were right, and sometimes neither one of us was. I remember one Saturday morning when we were both in our 40s. He wanted to paint the living room a warm cream color. I insisted it should be light blue. We went back and forth for nearly an hour. Can you imagine? An entire hour over a can of paint. Finally, our youngest son wandered into the room and asked, "Are you two still talking about the walls?" We looked at each other and suddenly burst into laughter. Neither one of us could even remember why we cared so much. That day taught us something. Sometimes, the argument isn't really about the paint, or the dishes, or whose turn it is to take out the trash. Sometimes we're simply tired. Sometimes we're worried about something we haven't talked about. Sometimes we just want to feel heard. There's a big difference. My husband had a habit that used to frustrate me. Whenever we disagreed, he'd become very quiet. Now, I wanted to solve everything immediately, right then, at that very moment. I'd follow him from room to room saying, "We need to talk about this." He'd smile gently and say, "We will. Just not while we're both upset." When I was younger, I thought he was avoiding the conversation. Years later, I realized he was protecting it. He understood something I didn't yet know. Words spoken in anger have a way of staying long after the anger leaves. So we made a little agreement. If one of us became too upset, we'd take a little time to calm down. Not to ignore the problem, not to punish each other with silence, simply to let our hearts become softer before we continued talking. It changed so many of our disagreements, because it's much easier to solve a problem when you're no longer trying to win. You know, after nearly 70 years together, I can't remember who won those little arguments. I don't remember who was right about the paint, or the curtains, or where to plant the tomatoes. But I do remember this: he never made me feel like I was his opponent. We were always on the same side, even when we disagreed. It was never me against him. It was always the two of us against the problem. I think that's one of the greatest gifts a marriage can have, the feeling that no matter what happens, you're still teammates. Life will bring enough challenges on its own: illness, financial worries, children, aging parents, unexpected disappointments. You don't need to become another challenge for each other. You need to become each other's safest place. At 97, I've learned that peace inside a marriage isn't created because two people never disagree. It's created because they remember what's more important than being right: being kind, being patient, being willing to say, "I'm sorry," even when those words are difficult to speak. And that leads me to the third lesson, the one I wish someone had told us when we were newly married. Never stop becoming curious about the person you promised to love. The third thing I wish every married couple knew is this: never stop getting to know each other. Now that may sound like strange advice coming from a woman who is married for 69 years. You might be thinking, after that long, surely you knew everything about your husband. The truth is, I didn't. Not even close. People grow. Life changes us. The young man I married at 28 wasn't the same man sitting beside me on our porch 40 years later. He became gentler, more patient, a little quieter, and far wiser than either of us could have imagined. The same was true for me. Marriage isn't about staying the same. It's about learning to fall in love with each new version of each other. One evening after supper, we were sitting on the porch as we always did. Out of nowhere, I asked him, "What did you want to be when you were a little boy?" He smiled and laughed. "In all these years, you've never asked me that." I laughed too. I suppose I never did. Then he told me something I'd never heard before. When he was 10 years old, he dreamed of becoming a school teacher. Can you believe that? All those years together, and I never knew. Life had taken him in a different direction. He became a mechanic instead, but somewhere deep inside, that little boy who loved teaching was still there. Maybe that's why he was always so patient when helping the grandchildren with their homework. That conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. We talked about childhood dreams, favorite memories, the people who had shaped our lives. It felt as though I was meeting an old friend all over again, and in many ways, I was. Sometimes we assume we already know everything about the person we married, so we stop asking questions. We stop listening as carefully. We stop being curious, and without meaning to, we begin living beside each other instead of truly knowing each other. Even in our 90s, we still asked little questions. What made you smile today? What are you thinking about? Do you remember our first little house? Those conversations kept our hearts connected, not because they were profound, because they reminded us that we still cared about each other's inner world. One of my favorite evenings happened just a few years before my husband passed. The electricity had gone out during a summer storm. No television, no lights, just 2 candles flickering on the kitchen table. We sat there talking for hours, sharing stories we'd somehow never told before. When the lights finally came back on, neither of us moved. We'd forgotten they were even off. That's what good conversation does. It makes time quietly disappear. If you're married today, ask your husband something you've never asked before. Ask your wife about a dream she once had, about a favorite childhood memory, about the happiest day she can remember. You may be surprised by the answers, because even after decades together, there are still beautiful parts of each other waiting to be discovered. Now, the 4th lesson may be the one that carried our marriage through the hardest seasons. Learn to forgive quickly and love even more quickly. The 4th thing I wish every married couple knew is that forgiveness should never be saved for special occasions. It should become part of the marriage-eshal occasions. It should become part of everyday life. If 2 people stay married long enough, they will disappoint each other. Not because they stop loving each other, because they're human. My husband forgot anniversaries. I overcooked dinners. He'd leave his muddy boots by the back door. I'd move his tools because I wanted the garage to look tidy. Then neither of us could find them. Life has a funny way of giving us thousands of little opportunities to become irritated. The question is, what do we do with those opportunities? I remember one autumn afternoon when we'd been married for nearly 30 years. We had planned to visit my parents for the weekend. My husband promised he'd be home by 4 o'clock. 4 came and went, then 5, then 6. This was long before cell phones. I sat by the window growing more worried, and if I'm being honest, a little more upset. When he finally pulled into the driveway, his shirt was covered with sawdust. He looked exhausted. Before he could even explain, I started talking. No, I started scolding. After I'd finished, he quietly said, "I'm sorry, Margaret. The Johnson family lost part of their roof in the storm. I stayed to help them get it covered before the rain came." Then he reached into his pocket and handed me a small wildflower. It had wilted a little from being in his pocket all afternoon. He smiled and said, "I picked this because I knew I'd be late. I hoped it might make you smile." Oh, I felt about 2 inches tall. I had spent an hour building a story in my mind, and none of it was true. That evening taught me something I've never forgotten. Never assume the worst about someone who's spent years proving they love you. Ask before you accuse. Listen before you judge. Forgiveness isn't only about the big mistakes. It's about the little ones too. The sharp words spoken after a tiring day. The forgotten errand. The misunderstanding. If we collect every small hurt like stones in our pockets, eventually the weight becomes too heavy for any marriage to carry. But if we choose to forgive, those pockets become wonderfully light. One of the sweetest habits my husband and I ever developed happened before bedtime. No matter what disagreement we'd had that day, we never went to sleep without saying, "I love you." Sometimes those words came easily. Sometimes they came through tears. But we said them anyway, because we knew something more important than winning an argument. Tomorrow was never promised. After he passed away, I've often thought about those evenings. Not once, not a single time did I regret choosing forgiveness. But I know I would have regretted holding on to pride. Pride builds walls. Forgiveness builds homes. At 97, I believe forgiveness is one of love's greatest gifts. Not because the other person always deserves it, because your heart deserves peace. And peace is a beautiful thing to share with the person sleeping beside you. Now, the 5th lesson may sound almost too simple, but after 69 years together, I truly believe it kept the romance alive. Never stop laughing together. The 5th thing I wish every married couple knew is this: never stop laughing together. Oh, life gives us plenty of reasons to cry. Bills, illness, disappointments, long nights, unexpected losses. If we don't make room for laughter, marriage can begin to feel like nothing but responsibilities. My husband had the most wonderful sense of humor. Not the kind that filled a room with loud jokes, the quiet kind. The kind that appeared exactly when I needed it most. I remember one Thanksgiving, I spent nearly the whole morning making a pumpkin pie. I was so proud of it. Beautiful golden crust, perfect filling. When I pulled it from the oven, I accidentally bumped the counter. The entire pie slid off the cooling rack and landed upside down on the kitchen floor. I just stood there staring at it. Then, I burst into tears, not because of the pie, because I'd been trying so hard to make everything perfect. My husband walked into the kitchen, looked at the pie on the floor, looked at me, and without saying a word, he knelt down beside it. Then he smiled and said, "Well, I've always wondered what pumpkin pie looks like from underneath." I couldn't help it. I started laughing, right there, with pumpkin filling all over my kitchen floor. A few minutes later, we were both laughing so hard we could barely clean it up. Do you know what I remember about that Thanksgiving? Not the ruined dessert. I remember laughing with the man I loved. That's the memory that stayed. Over the years, we laughed about so many ordinary things. The time he accidentally wore 2 different shoes to church. The day I spent 20 minutes looking for my glasses, only to discover they were sitting on top of my head. The grandchildren still tell that story, even now. Laughter has a beautiful way of turning embarrassing moments into cherished family memories. There were difficult seasons too, when money was tight, when one of us was sick, when the future felt uncertain. Even then, we looked for little reasons to smile. Sometimes we'd sit on the porch watching squirrels chase each other through the yard. He'd invent funny little stories about where they were rushing off to. Before long, we'd both be smiling again. Nothing about our situation had changed, but somehow, our hearts felt lighter. I've learned that laughter doesn't make problems disappear. It simply reminds us that joy still exists alongside them. And sometimes, that's enough to help us keep going. If you're married today, please don't become so busy building a life that you forget to enjoy it together. Dance in the kitchen while supper is cooking. Laugh when dinner burns. Smile when vacation plans fall apart. Years from now, those imperfect moments may become your favorite stories. After my husband passed away, one of the things I missed most was hearing him laugh. Sometimes, I still hear that laugh in my memories. Instead of making me sad, it makes me smile, because I realize something beautiful. Laughter echoes much longer than we imagine. And that brings me to the sixth lesson, the one that quietly strengthened our marriage through every season of life. Never stop choosing each other, even after the wedding day is long behind you. The sixth thing I wish every married couple knew is this: never stop choosing each other, not just on your wedding day, but on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, on a rainy Thursday morning, on the days when life feels easy, and especially on the days when it doesn't. When my husband and I stood in church all those years ago, we thought love was something that simply happened. Two people met, they fell in love, they got married, and then happily ever after. Oh, how young we were. What no one told us was that marriage isn't one decision, it's thousands of decisions. You wake up every morning and you quietly choose each other again. There was a season in our lives when everything seemed to happen at once. His mother became ill. One of our children was struggling in school. Money was tighter than we'd ever expected. Our roof started leaking, and my husband was working longer hours just to keep us afloat. By the time he came home each evening, he looked exhausted. There were days when we barely had enough energy to finish supper. Forget romance, we were simply trying to make it through the week. One evening, after we'd washed the dishes, he sat beside me on the porch. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then he reached over, took my hand, and said, "We'll get through this." Not, "You'll get through this." Not, "I'll figure it out." He said, "Will." Just one little word. But that word carried us through one of the hardest seasons of our marriage. Because I knew, whatever tomorrow brought, I wouldn't face it alone. Looking back, I don't remember every problem we solved. I remember how we solved them, together. Sometimes we'd sit at the kitchen table with a pencil, a notebook, and a pot of coffee, trying to figure out how to stretch our grocery budget until payday. Sometimes we'd kneel beside our bed and pray, because we simply didn't know what else to do. Sometimes we'd just sit quietly holding hands. No answers, no solutions. Just the comfort of knowing someone was carrying the burden with us. I've often thought, that's what marriage truly is. It's saying, whatever comes, we'll face it together. Not because one person is stronger, but because two hearts carrying the same load somehow make it lighter. You know, people sometimes asked us, "How did you stay married for 69 years? They expected some grand secret, some magical formula. My husband always smiled and answered, "Even after my husband was gone, I found little reminders of the life we'd built together. His old toolbox, the rocking chair he'd repaired 3 different times because he knew I loved sitting in it, the little note he'd left inside the cookie jar that simply said, 'Save me one.'" I still have that note, not because it's valuable, because it reminds me that love lives in ordinary choices, tiny ones, made day after day, year after year. If you're blessed enough to still have your husband or your wife, don't wait for your anniversary to tell them they're appreciated. Don't assume they'll always know. Take their hand, sit beside them a little longer tonight. Say thank you for the little things, because one day, those little things may become the memories you treasure most. And finally, there's one last lesson I want to leave with you. The lesson that became even clearer after I lost the man I loved. Love isn't measured by how long you're together. It's measured by how deeply you make each day count. The 7th and final thing I wish every married couple knew: only gratitude. If I could sit across the table from every married couple in the world, whether you've been married 6 months or 60 years, I'd gently take your hands and tell you this: don't wait. Don't wait to say you're sorry. Don't wait to say thank you. Don't wait to take the walk. Don't wait to plan the little weekend trip. Don't wait to hug a little longer. Don't wait to say, "I'm proud of you," or "I still choose you." One ordinary afternoon will quietly become the memory you'll treasure forever. You just won't know it while you're living it. At 97, I've come to believe that marriage is one of God's gentlest gifts, not because it protects us from sorrow, but because it gives us someone to share both joy and sorrow with, someone who celebrates our victories, someone who sits beside us during our losses, someone who knows our flaws and chooses to stay anyway. That is a beautiful kind of love. Before I say goodbye, I'd like to ask you something. If your husband or wife is sitting in the next room, when this video ends, go give them a hug. No special reason, no anniversary, no holiday. Just because today is another day you've been given together. And if you've already lost the love of your life, like I have, then smile at one happy memory today. Not because it hurts less, but because love like that deserves to be remembered with gratitude. I'd love to hear from you. How many years have you been married? Or, if you're remembering someone you deeply loved, tell me their first name in the comments. Tonight, I'll read every story I can, and I'll say a little prayer for every couple, past and present. Thank you for spending this time with me. May God bless your home with patience, your conversations with kindness, your hearts with forgiveness, and your marriage with the quiet, faithful love that grows stronger with every passing year. Until next time, take gentle care of each other, because one day, you'll discover what my husband and I learned after 69 beautiful years together. The greatest love stories are almost always written in the smallest moments.